What does dirt have to do with wine? Turns out, quite a lot. I'm Amanda Thomas, and you're listening to A Scientist Walks into a Bar. We bring you presentations by real scientists that were recorded at events called Science on Tap. In this episode, we get to hear from Dr. Scott Burns with his talk, The Mystique of Terroir, Geology and Wine. We recorded this at the Kagan's Theater in Vancouver, Washington in April 2018. Whether you drink wine or not, you probably know that a Cabernet from California can taste very different than a Cabernet from France. And you probably would think that that's because of the climate or the sun or the loving hands of the winemaker. And all those things definitely do make a difference. But the soil the grapes are grown in can have a profound effect on how the wine tastes. The same kind of grapes grown on the same hill can taste very different depending on the geology underneath. Scott is a local legend here in Portland. He was a professor of geology and the past chair of the Department of Geology at Portland State University. While he's technically retired, he still does a ton of teaching and is about the most enthusiastic speaker you will ever hear. If you like learning about geology, check back in our archives for episode 5 for Scott's talk on the Missoula floods. One more quick thing before we get started. If you enjoy our podcast, we could really use your help in getting the word out. Tweeting or posting about us is great. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at SciBar Podcast. With that, here we go.
Well, thank you very much, Allie. Welcome to all of you tonight. It's so much fun to see quite a few people out here. We're going to have fun. And we're going to be talking about terroir. And my aim in life is to turn everybody into a terroirist. Now, we aren't going to tell Homeland Security about that. But what we are going to be doing is I'm going to tell you a little bit about what terroir is and what affects the flavors of wines. That's what we're going to start off doing at the beginning. Now, I've been interested in wines ever since the days I was at Stanford University, and wine tasting in the Napa Valley, fledgling place. You would be able to go from one end, from Sebastiani and Mondavi, all the way to the other end, Christian Brothers and Charles Krug, do it all in a day. Now it takes you a whole month to do half of it. And in those days, nobody had ever heard of it. And then for a professor, you got to publish. And so when I taught my first 5 years in Switzerland, I made wine with my students every year. And this was a great way to teach them science. And we were in the white wine producing area of Switzerland. And so in 1976 in the Journal of College Science Teaching, I wrote an article called Science Can Be Fun and Tasty Winemaking in the Lab. So I've been involved in that ever since. And then when I came back to Oregon and Portland State in 1990, in 1992, I taught a soil class. All the grad students had to do a project, and one gal in my class said, I want to do something on wine soils. Well, nobody in the wine industry knew what their soil was. And so I said, go out and let's figure out what they have got. And what that did, it birthed the whole study. And with Dion Starpiece's master's degree that she eventually did, we birthed the whole idea that I'm going to be talking tonight about the 3 major soil types in the Willamette Valley and how they affect the terroir of the wine. So let's talk a little bit about wine. And a great study was done back in 1982 in the United States, and they polled over 100,000 people who drink alcohol. And they said, what is your favorite alcohol that you have? And you can see in back of here, 48 or 49% of those people were beer drinkers, and 16% wine drinkers, and the rest were hard liquor, scotch, bourbon, martinis, etc. that you've got. And then they redid that in 2012, and there's been a major shift in the United States. Now, beer is 48, and I think the Portland, Vancouver area is holding that up with all of our microbreweries that we have got. But look what's happened to wine. And a lot of people have switched from the hard liquor to wine. And when you go to social events, most of the time you get wine or beer and not as much hard liquor as you did in the past. Now people on the weekends, where do they go? They go out to wine country, and they go traveling around from winery to winery to winery. That was a culture that was never there. Every state in the United States has a winery. It is amazing. And so I've gotten the chance to give talks all over the United States. Even Vermont has 4 wineries. So it is fun. So wine is very, very important. Now, every time that you look at a bottle of wine, it's going to be different from the next one, the next one, the next one. The flavors are going to be different based on 8 different things. Number 1, obviously the grape. And a Cabernet is going to be different from a Riesling, different from a Chardonnay. The major grape that is grown around here is Pinot Noir. We have 12 different clones. And so you have the traditional Pommard and Wädenswil, and then all the Dijon clones. And each one will have a different color and a little slightly different flavor. And so those are very important. Secondly, the geology in the soils, and as we will see in a second, because I'm a geologist, will affect things. So you have 10 macronutrients, 6 micronutrients, and then a whole bunch of heavy metals and trace elements. And all of those will together produce different flavors. Number 3, the climate. And the best climates for producing the best grapes are going to be dry climates. When do we invite our friends to come to Oregon and Washington? It's always in July, August, and September. Why? Because it doesn't rain. This is a xeric moisture regime. And that is perfect because you don't want it raining at the end of the season. You want the temperature to go up in the daytime and then down at night, up and down. The more of those up and downs, the more complexity that you've got. Very, very important. And then the soil hydrology. And so therefore you got to have enough silt and clay in the soil in order to feed the plant the water at the end of the season. And so soil hydrology, very, very important. And then as you can see, physiography. You want to have primarily a south-facing slope between 300 feet elevation, and we used to say 900 feet elevation, because above that, the grapes would not mature. That is, they wouldn't have that 23, 24 Brix or 23, 24% sugar that the yeast would convert into alcohol. Now we're going up to 1,300 feet elevation. Why? Because the climate is warming. And in the last 6 years, those grapes at those higher elevations have all matured. And so where you are, orientation, elevation, very, very important. And then another one that I've added in, and last year we had the International Terroir Conference. It's every 2 years, and we had never been in the United States. We had it in McMinnville, Oregon, at Linfield College. Greg Jones ran that. And some of the researchers in France and in Italy kept on saying soil biota is very important. Those are the little bugs, the bacteria and the nematodes and everything living in the soil helps develop the flavors. So the water, the chemistry from the soils and the geology all affect the soil biota, which all together produces the flavor. Those first 6 that you have got up here, that's what we call terroir. It's the taste of the place. Every region is going to have a taste. I'll come back to that in a second. But there are 2 other factors that are going to affect the flavors that you have got. And the biggest one is going to be the winemaker, because the winemaker has got to choose, are you going to oak that wine or not? How long are you going to have the skins in contact with the fluids that you have got? Are you going to have native yeast, or are you going to inoculate with your yeast? And if you do oak it, are you going to use French oak or American oak or Hungarian oak? All of these are very, very important decisions that have to be made, and they will really imprint the winemaker on the wine. And the last one is the vineyard management. Do the rows go north and south? Do they go east and west? Do you trim the leaves on the right side or the left side? Do you have cover crop in between? What type of trellis? All of those will affect the flavors that you have got. But those are local, and that's to the winery and not to the region. And so terroir, this is a term that goes all the way back to the French and the French monks in Burgundy 400, 500 years ago. And so it is the total elements of the vineyard. It's the bedrock geology, it's the soils and everything like that. Color and age. Why do I put that in? A soil as it grows older and older, gets redder and redder because the iron oxides build up, and you want to have old soils. We limit, in the Willamette Valley, we limit the vigor of the grapes by soils, not by water. And then so it's the taste of the place. And it's best expressed in the cool climate grapes, and I'll come back to that in a second. We also use this term terroir, and you're going to see it being used over and over and over for things like cheese, coffee, In Vermont, they use it for the maple syrups and hops. Every time you go in and have an IPA, the brewmaster is going to list all the hops and where they're from. That's terroir. And then we started a new program at Portland State where I teach with one of the young faculty members using my techniques. And now we're studying the terroir of marijuana because our states, both of us, it is legal. And I said to John, this is not going to work because in Oregon, most of it's going to be grown inside. He said, but Southern Oregon's been doing it for years and years, and they know where the good soils are. And so we actually got a grant from them down there to do this, which is really, really fun. Nick Erath, one of the fathers of winemaking in the Willamette Valley, had a great quote. 80% of the quality of the wine comes from the vineyard, 20% from the winery. That is, he's a terroirist. And in a good year, like we've had for the last 5-6 years, the winemaker kind of sits back and lets the wine make themselves. In a cool year, like 2007, 2011, the winemaker really has to become active and take part in this. Otherwise, the wines turn out bad. Here's a map of the world, and it's kind of faded out, but you'll see these are all the major wine grape growing areas in the world, and they're all at the same latitudes. This is climate, regional climate. In North America, it's 30 degrees north. Europe, over in China. China is one of the major producers of wine in the world. Last year, I was in China. I had lots of bottles of the Great Wall Cabernet. Was it any good? No, but the chateaus that it came out of were copied directly from France, and it looked all good, etc., but it was not good wine. And then in the southern hemisphere, you've got 30 degrees south. You have, and so I'm going to be teaching a class in terroir for Stanford next year down in Chile, the land of Carmenere. And then we go right across the border into the land of Malbec, over in Argentina or South Africa, Australia, where they're producing great reds. And then I used to live in New Zealand, the land of Sauvignon Blanc, I think the best in the world. So it's all regional climate. It's all 30 degrees north or south latitude, and that is the best for your Vitis vinifera type of grapes that you have got. Now, we got to go back to France, and I got to tell you a little bit about that because most of the grapes that we use are from France and the major regions that you have got. And so there's Paris, and the two major areas are Burgundy, which is right there, and then you've got Bordeaux over here. And we could draw a line right through the center of the country there, and this area up here is the cool climate area. This is the warmer area down here. And the Willamette Valley is the Burgundy of North America. And so we are always compared to this particular area here. Same climate, but different soil. So our wine's going to be slightly different, and we'll talk about that. Bordeaux down here, oh my God, they make just, that is the primo area of the world. They're all blends, though. There isn't much terroir because it is mixing of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cab Franc, Malbec, etc. And then the Rhone varietals, and we're producing a lot of really good Rhones up the Columbia Gorge, especially one of my favorite wineries up there, Syncline Winery on the Washington side. The Rhone varietals that you've got there. And then Provence down there, that's the land of all of the rosés. But, when you buy a bottle of wine from France, it will tell you the name of the vineyard, the name of the winery. It will tell you the region. If it's in Burgundy or Bordeaux, it will have a valuation, the Grand Cru, or it is going to be the Premier Cru and stuff like this. It'll have the year, the percent alcohol, but it is not going to tell you what grape you're using. You're supposed to understand the terroir. If it is red and it's from Burgundy, you know it's Pinot Noir. If it's white and from Burgundy, you know it's Chardonnay. If it's red and from Beaujolais, you know it's going to be Gamay grape. And the only area that does put it on is the Alsace area, where most of it is Pinot Gris. And so your people in France were raised to understand terroir. And here is a friend of mine visited this winery in France, and this is in Beaujolais, and it says Maison de Terroir. And everybody is into that. I did a TV interview on Channel 8 early this week on Monday to advertise this thing here. And we tasted wines from the Willa Kenzie Winery, which is down in the middle of the Willamette Valley. And that was started by Bernard Lacroute, a good Frenchman who understands terroir. And he was the very first winery in the United States to name his winery after his soil, the Willackenzie. And he sells little hats that says, "Dirt Matters." And I got like 5 of them because I think it is very important. And so that is one of the heart things of terroir. So here's Burgundy. Beautiful, absolutely great area. But it is slightly different bedrock, and we'll come back to that in a second. And for many, many years, for many generations, the people of Burgundy have known where the best grapes are going to be grown. And those are going to be, there's a line that goes right through here. And above that, that is the Grand Cru area. The next area down is the Premier Cru. And in fact, here you can see Grand Cru, Premier Cru, and then the common wines that are down at the bottom. Geologists came in and looked at those, and there is a geological marker in between them. This area up here is primarily marl, M-A-R-L, which is a dirty limestone. And this area is pure limestone, and down here is river deposits, so it's a hodgepodge of everything. And so there is a direct relationship. It doesn't matter who is making the wines up here or here. These are always second best to these. And it's all the geology. That is terroir. And the French have known that for years and years. Now, the grapes that we primarily grow in our part of the country, the West Coast, Vitis vinifera. These are all of these French-style grapes that we have got. And there are over 4,000 varieties, and it's always fun every year because everybody's bringing in a new variety to see what is going to be the next Viognier produced here, or the next Tempranillo, or something like that goes well in here. But these are all the names that you're familiar with. Now, let's talk about climate for a second. And the system that we use is the one put together by Greg Jones, I think one of the greatest wine climatologists. And what you do is you have cool climate, intermediate warm, warm, and hot. And so he has defined the average temperatures in those particular areas. And on the left-hand side, I put the regions and where they are. And so the Willamette Valley is in the cool climate, as is the Loire Valley in France and Burgundy. But then you've got all of the German, the Rhine, the Mosel, etc., that are in that, and the Alsace area. Those are all classic cool climates. And then we get into the intermediate warm. So that's eastern Washington, southern Oregon, Rioja, Spain, Bordeaux, Chile. Those are all intermediate warm. You're getting warmer. And when you go from this, you go from cool climate grapes into the big heavier reds. Down here, then into the warm areas, you have got the Napa Valley, the Sonoma Valley, South Africa, the Rhone Valley, Portugal, Barolo. You have some of the areas in Italy, and then Australia. And then the really hot areas, you've got Hunter Valley and Barossa in Australia, Portugal, and then Lodi, California, where they grow those old vine Zinfandels, which I love. And so those are the different regions, or different groupings. Now, here you've got cool, intermediate warm, warm, and hot. So now what we want to do is match up the grapes. And so in cool climate areas, what do you grow? You grow the German-style wines, Gewürztraminer, Müller-Thurgau, and Riesling. And then Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and then Sauvignon Blanc. That's kind of in that area. Once you get into intermediate warm, then you're going over here and you're starting to pick up the Cabs, Merlots, and Cab Franc, Tempranillo, Dolcetto, etc. And as you move over here into the warm, then you get your Cabernets, Sangiovese, Grenache, and then as you get really hot, then you get into the Zinfandels and Nebbiolos, and then raisins. And so what you do, if you want to grow grapes, what you do is say, what type of climate do we have? How many growing degree days do we have? What's our average temperature? And then you match up the grapes you go with that. And so here in the Willamette Valley, we are cool climate. And the differences in terroir are best expressed, that is the difference in flavors that you can pick up, and the differences in climate and soils are going to be found in 3 main grapes. Riesling, the Germans have been doing that for years. You'll go up the Rhine River and you'll have 2 vineyards right next to one another, different geologies, but the same winemaker doing both of the grapes and the wines, same year. All the factors, remember those 8 factors that I showed you before. You keep everything the same except the soil. The different flavors are going to be terroir differences. That's terroir tasting. And so Riesling is incredible. Chardonnay, we tend to oak it too much. Californians especially, my God, they put it in all new oak, and then they do malolactic fermentation for the buttery stuff, and it's really wonderful. Now, I love a Rombauer Chardonnay, which is that, and many of those are that way. Here in Oregon and Washington, we tried to copy the Californians and failed miserably. We were using the wrong grape, first of all, and then secondly, we just could not do the malolactic and have the big buttery that was there. And so we do it now the style that you get in Burgundy. So lightly oaked, just a wee bit of oak on it, and so it's a fruit-forward type of wine, and Chardonnay is making a huge comeback in Oregon and in the Willamette Valley. Back in the 1990s, everybody was beavering off all their Chardonnay, and planting Pinot Gris, because the best Pinot Gris in the United States is grown in the Willamette Valley. So Chardonnay is making a comeback, and Pinot Noir is a thin-skinned red grape. And so it's very, very delicate. And you can really pick up those nuances and different flavors between each one of the different terroirs. And so those are the three major ones you have. Once you get into the heavier reds, the Cabs, Merlots, Syrahs, the varietal overtakes it. And now a really good wine taster can pick up those differences, but the average person can't. And so I really believe that the cool climate grapes are the best places to taste differences in terroir, and the best place in the world to taste differences in terroir is the Willamette Valley. You live in it, and so you can get a chance to do it, and we'll talk about that coming up. So if you want to plant a vineyard, you got to have a certain bunch of characteristics. Number one, you got to have at least 180 frost-free days a year. And on this side of the mountains, we've got that. So that is not a problem. Now, mineral nutrients, you don't want to have a lot of mineral nutrients in it. This is contrary to normal agricultural characteristics. When you plant a garden in your backyard, what do? You fertilize it. You give that calcium, potassium, sodium, nitrogen to the soils, and therefore the plants will grow better. You want to reduce, you want to have just enough nutrients in the soil to make a great wine grape. And there was a question in there. Do you want to have lots of leaves? No. You want the energy to go into the grape and not into the leaves and the stems. Think of a grape anthropomorphically. When it comes back to life in the spring, like right now, bud break is going on right now. And it looks around and it says, oh my God, life is tough. There are no nutrients here. There's no water here. And I start reproducing. What is my aim in life? What is my raison d'etre? My reason to be, it is to reproduce. And so I better put all my energy into my grape and not into the leaves and stems. But if it looks around and it has lots of nutrients in the soil and it has lots of water, it says, life is easy. I will eventually reproduce, and so I'll grow leaves and stems and leaves and stems. And then in the fall, when it's time to ripen and the winemaker comes around and you only have 15 or 16 bricks or 15 or 16% alcohol, the winemaker is going to be a little mad because you have not put your energy into the grape but into the leaves and stems, and you are a deep doo-doo. And so is the winemaker. And so therefore, you need to stress the grapes, reduce the vigor, and we do that through lower nutrients. You want to have well-drained soils, especially for the red grapes. White grapes are a little more flexible. A perfect slope is going to be 7 to 8 degrees to south. And then maximum elevation, it keeps going up and up as the climate just keeps warming. And you don't want to be at the very, very bottom because you get cold air drainage. Down in the Illinois Valley, which is southwest Oregon, they have huge cold air drainage, early frost and late frost, and it wipes out the crops. And then the minimum temperatures that the vineyard will affect it. If you have less than 15 degrees, it wipes out everything. Less than 10 degrees, cool climate grapes will get wiped out. Less than 5 degrees, warm climate grapes will wipe out. Willamette Valley, not a problem. Eastern Washington, huge problem. It's that every 5 or 6 years they have 30 below for a week. And that is not good because it kills the whole grape plant. And so you have to have self-rooting grapes because then the roots will grow back up. In the Willamette Valley, everything is on American rootstock because of phylloxera, a little bug that kills the plant. And so the Cabernet Sauvignon, or the Pinot Noir, or the Chardonnay, or the Riesling is grafted onto American rootstock. And if it wipes out the upper part of the plant, then the rootstock comes back and it's not a drinkable grape. So Eastern Washington, different situation over there. So let's take a look at the essential nutrients that you have got. You need to have 10 macronutrients that are there. And you've got carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and chlorine. And though you need to have large amounts of those. 2 of those, carbon and oxygen and hydrogen, 3 of them are found in the water and the atmosphere. So the rest of those are going to be coming out of the soil and the dirt. And then you got to have some micronutrients, lesser quantities of iron, manganese, zinc, copper, boron, and molybdenum. The last 2 are the ones that a lot of times cause problems, especially in the Willamette Valley. And if you go out into the vineyard and instead of having dark green leaves, if you look and they're just light green, they're probably, you're going to have to cut a little bit of the leaf, send it into the lab, and they'll say most likely you need more boron or molybdenum to give, given as a soil additive. And then once you do that, then it will do quite well. We're also finding that the trace elements, chromium, selenium, iodine, cobalt, arsenic, lead, cadmium, lead, and nickel, all may also be part of the flavor package that you have got. So 10 different characteristics of starting your vineyard. Number 1, depth of the soil. Certain grapes love a deep soil. Chardonnay loves a deep soil, whereas Syrah likes a shallow soil. So you have to match the 2 up there. pH is very important. You want to have it between 5.5 and 10. When it's above 10, that's a very basic type of soil, it will reduce the uptake of copper, iron, zinc, and manganese. And if it's below 5.5, then the uptake of phosphorus is really good, and it will inhibit the root growth. Also salinity. You say, oh, let's just go out in the desert and just add water to it. No, because there's a lot of salts in the soils. It will affect the uptake of phosphorus. And then texture, that's the amount of sand, silt, and clay that you have got in it. It will affect the water holding capacity. Remember, that's very important at the end of the season when we don't irrigate. And then the ease of cultivation. Structure is how the sand, silt, and clay is held together. And so that leads to soil strength and taking machinery over the property, drainage, and root penetration. Drainage, as I mentioned before, very important. You want a well-drained soil. If it's a poorly drained soil, what happens is the grapes get fat with just a lot of water. It dilutes the juice, and therefore it dilutes the flavor. It's not very good. Clay content will affect the amount of root penetration, but as we see in a second, it will also affect the flavor. Color of the soil. The darker the soil, it will absorb a lot of heat. And that heat will be given off at nighttime, and it will speed up the rate of maturation, which is very important. Red color, as I mentioned before, the redder the soil, the older the soil. Also, red tells you it's well drained. And so that's why you'll see most of the vineyards, the great vineyards in the Willamette Valley, are on red soils. Rockiness will also affect things. And if you go to Châteauneuf-du-Pape in southern France, it's just all cobbles and gravels there. And they love it because it absorbs heat in the daytime, and that heat is given off at nighttime, and it speeds up the maturation. And it also forces deep root penetration. Also, limestone and caliche, which is a soil-formed calcium carbonate, will also affect the rooting depths that you have got. Okay, so let's go to Sonoma, California. And this is the Russian River area. And we have a good friend of mine, Terry Wright, did a study of the Iron Horse vineyards. These are both Pinot Noir. They had 2 vineyards, same winemaker, same year. Everything was the same in those factors that I showed you at the beginning. But you have got Vineyard A, it had 42% clay in the soil, whereas Vineyard B had only 20% clay. They made the wines, they matured it, and then they drank it 2 years later. They did a blind tasting, and it came out, everybody loved this one down here. Softer tannins, bigger nose, more elegance, lighter color. And the only difference there was in the soil. That's a terroir difference. And so that's what we're talking about here. Now, where I've had a chance to travel to all those major grape growing areas that I showed you on the map before. I mean, this is Mendoza, Argentina, the land of the great Malbecs. And there's Aconcagua, the great volcano in the Andes. And all of the grapes that are found there are all on alluvial fans that are coming out from the erosion of the Andes. What we found is the highest terraces, which have the greatest amount of caliche, have the best Malbec. As you go to the younger one, you have less caliche and calcium carbonate in it and not quite as good. And then you go out to Australia where you have old soils, and those will also produce absolutely great red wines and the heavy reds that you've got. Let's bring us back here to the Willamette Valley, and the majority of the Willamette Valley is in Oregon. And so it was David Lett that brought the grapes here in 1961. And he loved growing Pinot Noir. He had graduated from Mecca for winemaking in the United States. That's the University of California at Davis. And he said, I want to grow Pinot Noir. And where's the best climate? And all the instructors said, Oregon, but they don't have a wine industry. Why would you want to go up there? And he says, I will go up there and form it. He was the second guy to come up here. Richard Sommer started growing Pinot down in the Umpqua. And he started here. And by 1975, his Pinots were really good. So he entered them in the International Pinot Noir competition, which was in Burgundy, and every year was only grapes from Burgundy versus themselves. And he didn't quite win, but he almost won. And all of the French were saying, "Qu'est-ce que c'est? Où est Oregon?" You know, what is going on here? Where is this Oregon? And you will find that a lot of the French wineries have now bought in to Oregon and Willamette Valley vineyards because we do produce great Pinot Noir. And so in the Willamette Valley, we had our first planting in 1961. And now in Oregon, we have over 700 wineries, 28,000 acres. In Oregon, we produce 70% red wine, 30% white wine. And it's interesting, even in southern Oregon, which is hot as can be, they still produce Pinot Noir as the major one that is there. So 60% of all the wine in Oregon is Pinot Noir, even though a lot of it is in the intermediate warm area that you've got. So the whole Willamette Valley is primarily cool climate. So Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Noir, Riesling, Müller, Thurgau, Gewürztraminer. Used to be, if a winery in the valley would produce a Cabernet or a Merlot or a Syrah, you wouldn't eat it or wouldn't drink it because it would never have matured. There just isn't enough heat here to do that. Now what we do is trucks go with Pinot Noir grapes from the Willamette Valley up to eastern Washington, where they can't grow Pinot Noirs, and then the trucks come back with the Cabs, Merlots, Syrahs, Viogniers, and then they make them here. So let's talk a little bit about the Willamette Valley here. And so the rankings, and so if we look at the total number of vineyards in the United States, as we mentioned before, California is number one. Look at all of the wineries there. But number two, and this is just 2 years ago, it's actually over 900 now. Washington is number 2, and Oregon is number 3. New York is number 4, and Texas is number 5 in number of wineries. Now, where I got my information was slightly different than was gotten in the other questions, but the wine production, California is still at the top, but actually New York buzzes by Oregon and Washington. Washington is way up there. You have Chateau Saint Michel and Columbia Crest, which are huge volume wineries that they have, but New York has Manischewitz and Ripple, which produce huge volumes. Now, is it quality wine? No. So if you want to do volumes of quality wine, Washington is definitely way up here that you have got. And Oregon is way down because Oregon really doesn't have the large volume ones. The largest winery in Oregon is A to Z. And A to Z is also Rex Hill. That's their expensive brand. And A to Z has a price point. No wine is going to be less than $10 or greater than $20. And so they don't use an awful lot of oak there. But the impact on our economies are incredible. In fact, Washington is now over $4 billion a year that the wine industry gives to the state, and Oregon is over $2 billion. So very, very important. And so in Oregon, in primarily the Willamette Valley, huge numbers of wineries. But look at the number of vineyards. And there are a lot more vineyards than wineries. And the reason is there are a lot of wineries that do not have vineyards. In Portland, there are over 20 wineries in Portland. My favorite one is Hip Chicks Do Wine. They don't have any vineyards, but they buy wine from the farmers that are out there they have contracts every year. And now what we are finding is a lot of wineries will have their estate grapes that are there, but everybody wants to taste differences in terroir. And so they will source grapes from another bedrock in order to have at least 2 different types of soils in their Pinot Noirs. And so we're seeing a lot of purchasing and contracts with other people that you have got. But huge amount of direct sales that you have got, cases of wine, and things like that. Here is the Pinot Noir, the king or the queen of grapes in the Willamette Valley. And the interesting thing is, Riesling was poo-pooed for a long time. It just could not make a go of it. And in the early days, everybody had the big 3, Gewürztraminer, Müller-Thurgau, and Riesling. And in about 1990, they beavered them off and then grafted on Pinot Gris. Because you could earn $12 a bottle versus $6 a bottle for the German-style wines. And the reason is a lot of us were affected by Blue Nun. Do you remember Blue Nun Riesling? Like 5% residual sugar, sweet, sweet, sweet. And the West Coast really doesn't produce a lot of sweet wines. And so it just got a bad reputation. Now, in the Willamette Valley, Riesling is making a huge comeback. Why? Because everybody's doing dry Riesling, and then you again are going to find the differences on the 3 major parent materials that we have got. So in Oregon, we have 15 different AVAs, American Viticultural Association areas. The biggest one is the Willamette Valley, and that's what I'm talking about. The Umpqua's down here, the Rogue River here, Illinois Valley, Applegate that is here, the Columbia Gorge. This is the Columbia River area that we have got there. Columbia Valley, Walla Walla that is up here, and then we get over here, Snake River. The newest AVA that we have is the Rocks of Milton Freewater, which are right on the border between Oregon and Washington. Oh my God, the best Syrah in the world is coming out of that. It is incredible, and it's one geology, and I wish I had time to get in and talk about that because it is a great story that is here. Here in Portland, we're really, really close to the gorge. My gorge wineries are just exploding, and they are there are so many really, really good wineries up there. I mean, you get a twofer trip. You get to go through the Columbia Gorge with all the great geology that you have got, and the Missoula floods, and Beacon Rock, and the Bridge of God's landslide. As a geologist, I got a little excited about that. And then you get up to Hood River, and you've got all of those wineries, or all the way to the Dalles. And they call it from Burgundy to Bordeaux in 20 miles, because you go from cool climate on Underwood Mountain all the way to the Dalles, and it's warm. And so you get the cabs, you get Zinfandels growing in the Dalles. And so I'm going to be focusing here. Now, the interesting thing in the Willamette Valley, it's been subdivided into 7 and now maybe 8 sub-regions, sub-AVAs based on the terroir. Started out with the people in Dundee Hills, and they said, we have the basalt bedrock, the Jory soil, and we want to put Dundee Hills on our wine labels. And then the people in Yamhill County said, no, we have the Willackenzie soil. We want to put that on it. And the people on Chehalem Mountain, they said, well, we want to put Chehalem Mountain on it. And the people down in the Eola Hills, down in Salem, Eola means wind. They get the cool winds coming through the Van Duzer corridor every day, cooling down the grapes. And oh my God, it just produces great Pinots that are down there. People in McMinnville have an area into the Coast Range. They got some older basalts that are there and some really, really good bedrocks that are there. So each one said that we wanted to put those sub-AVAs on. Instead of just doing it piece by piece, they said, no, this is the Willamette Valley. We all help everybody out. And they prepared their applications for the new AVAs, and they took them to the organization, the Tobacco and Firearms people, and they all handed them in the same day. He said, we are not competitors. We are all friends, but we want to put these different labels on there. And it's all based on terroir. Now, back in 1992, I was working with a grad student, Dion Starpiece, and she was doing a soil project for my graduate course in soils. And I said, go out and figure out what types of soils the wineries are developed on. She went out and said, nobody knows. I said, nobody knows. So we went out and collected all that information and put it together, and then eventually developed into a master's thesis for her. And what we found is there were 23 major soils. Now, in the United States, every soil region with a characteristic, we use a common term. So we have, that's the first one, Jory, Willackenzie, Laurelwood, Yamhill, Woodburn. Generally, it goes back to the place where it was first described. The second one is the parent material. And then the third one is the soil classification. So some of you are biologists, and you know that we are Homo sapiens, and a cat is a Felix domesticus. That's the genus species name. Well, we also have names for soils with the order, suborder, great group, subgroup, etc. And it's a hierarchical one. And so that's what these are over here. And so what we found is the three major soil types in the Willamette Valley. We surveyed 50%. Of all the ones at that time. The number one was the Jory soil, which was on Columbia River basalt. That is the black rock that we have around here. It's volcanic. Where were the volcanoes? Way on the other side where Oregon, Washington, and Idaho come together. And that's a hot spot. That hot spot is now underneath Yellowstone National Park. And so between 16 and 14 million years ago, about 90% of all of the basalt came out of there. Those flows got into the ancestral Columbia River, flowed all the way to the coast, and then solidified along the way. There were no mountains. And so you have layer upon layer upon layer. You go to Multnomah Falls, you'll see 5 major layers there. That's what we have got. That's all Columbia River basalt. And one of the flows, a whole bunch of the flows got to the Dundee Hills, then was uplifted later on. And so and they are well weathered and so very red. Secondly, the Willackenzie soils are uplifted coast range sediments. These are old sandstones and shales, old beaches and offshore muds that were squeezed together to form rocks and then uplifted. The completely different characteristic type of rocks for making Pinots. And then the third one, basalt. This is on mainly Chehalem Mountains, and it rings all the way around the Tualatin Valley. And it is a basalt soil. It is red. But it has had windblown silt blown off of the floodplains over the last 2.6 million years. And then it's weathered into little iron concretions, iron, silica, manganese concretions that we call pisolites. And so this is going to be our newest AVA. That is called the Laurelwood AVA, and Ponzi Winery is pushing for that. I think it's a great idea. And then you've got Missoula flood sediments that are down here. There is the Woodburn soil, which is very, very common in that. The Willamette is another one that is there. And that's the fourth one. Those are the valley bottoms, but those are high in nutrients: calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and phosphorus. And they grow leaves and stems and leaves and stems and leaves and stems. And you can grow some pretty good white wines on it, but the best Pinots are all on those upper three, which are all old. Alpha sols and ultisols mean old soils. Ultisols means ultic weathering. It's the reddest soil that we have gotten in the whole state of Oregon. And so those are the three major ones. And so starting in the middle 1990s, we noted that winemakers who were making grape wines on the two different soils, the wines were completely different. Even though it was the same year, same winery, same vineyard techniques, everything was the same except the soils. And they said, oh my God, we're getting differences in terroir. And then we expanded it as we got into around 2000 into the Laurelwoods. And so the great debate that we have in the Willamette Valley is which soil produces the best flavors. Is it the Jory soil? Is it the Willackenzie? Is it the Laurelwood soil? And so that's the great debate that we have. Here is the heart of Dundee. These are the Jory soils. They're the Missoula flood sediments down here. This is all volcanic material there. Here is the Jory soil that is right there. It is the state soil of Oregon. Every state has got a state soil. It took me 12 years to get that through the state legislature in Oregon. Six years ago, it was voted the dumbest bill in the legislature. I was on every talk show in Portland about my dumb bill. But in my office now, I have the nice little certificate from the governor saying, congratulations on your bill, because 2 years later it passed. And why do we have a state anything? Why do our 2 states? We have a state bird, we have a state rock, we have a state drink, we have a state song, we have state everything. The reason is kids in 4th grade get a little blue book. It's called the Oregon Blue Book or the Washington Blue Book, and they learn all the state things that makes their state, famous. And so all the soil science societies in the 1990s said we need to have a state soil. 5 states at that time already had state soils, and that's to highlight agriculture. And it had to have 2 characteristics. It had to be very distinctive. Well, the Jory is the reddest soil in the state of Oregon. Secondly, it has to have a high acreage. And it's number 4 in the acreage of soils used for agriculture. The third thing in Oregon and in Washington, because we have 2 states. We have the west side and we have the east side. And they have different political bents. You have to unite the east side to the west side. Well, how can you do that with soils? Because soils are a weathering phenomena. And the Jory is all on the west side. And it's all weathered, and it's highly weathered basalt. But I said, oh my God, where did all that Jory soil come from? It's Columbia River basalt. Where did the Columbia River basalt come out of the ground? In eastern Oregon and eastern Washington, and it came all the way down. If it wasn't for eastern Oregon, there wouldn't be any soil in the western part, and the legislators ate it up, and they passed it. And so now we have a state soil. So if you get a chance to go down there, be sure to check that out. Here is the Willackenzie, the second one that you've got, and I got a wine bottle here showing you. They're all red, and they're all old. And here are the Pisolites. These are these little iron, silica, manganese, and then a whole bunch of other elements that are in there that are concretions that have formed in old windblown silt that is there. Now, people always say, well, Scott, what's the difference in the flavor that you get between the Jory and the Willackenzie? And the Laurelwood's kind of halfway in between. And it used to be, you could pour the 2, and I could always tell the Jory because the basalt soils because it was light red. And the Willackenzie was always dark red. But now, because of Robert Parker and the Wine Spectator and the Wine Observer, where they evaluate all wines on a 100-point scale, one of the factors for red wines is the darker the red, the better. Well, a light red Pinot doesn't make it. So all of the Jorys have gotten darker in color just so they get higher Robert Parker values. But still, the flavors are still the same. Red fruits, raspberries, red plums, red currants, red cherries, strong bouquet. Whereas the marine sediments are all dark red colors. And those are the blackberries, the black cherries, the black plums, strong finish. But Ken Wright, who is winemaker of the year for the world in the Wine Observer, he was on the front cover, and he has Ken Wright Winery in the middle part of the Willamette Valley. He said, Burns, you're a geologist. You guys only drink wine out of the box. What do you know about flavors and stuff like that? And I said, well, you're kind of right. And he says, no, the basalt wines are fruit-driven flavors, where the marine sediments are floral spice flavors like lavender, cola, tobacco, cedar, and anise. Some of you may be wine tasters, and you can pick all those things out. I'm a geologist, I can't. But then Adam Campbell, who is the winemaker out at Elk Cove, and they have all 3 vineyards. So they sell a terroir trilogy. And you can go in and buy the same year, the same Pinot, but on different bedrocks. And the marine sediments, the Willackenzie types of soils, he said are primarily black cherry and silk. And then the Laurelwood, he says, in fact, his house is actually on the Laurelwood, blue fruit and earthiness. And then the volcanic, you get the reds, the red pie cherry and spice. And so every winemaker has a difference in evaluation, but they all agree there is a difference. And that's terroir. That's why the Willamette Valley is so exciting to taste wine in. I had a PhD student a couple of years ago. And we tasted. We went out to all of the vineyards, and what we did is we looked at the soils and found the nutrients in the soils, then followed it into the juice, and then into the finished wine. So just some of the things what we found out: macronutrients that you have got, and B is basalt, M is the marine sediments, W is the windblown ones with the Pisolites in it. Found that looking at phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Phosphorus was very, very, very very high in the basalt, in the windblown, low in the marine sediments. Potassium was very, very high in the windblown. Calcium, there's no difference. Magnesium was high in the windblown, medium in the marine sediments, and low in the basalts, and sulfur was high in the basalt. And then looking at the micronutrients, most of them were all the same, except sodium was going to be high in the marine sediments. Well, it's from the ocean, so it's going to have high sodium. But all the other was manganese, cobalt, and iron were all high in the basalts, and then the Willamette was no different in those. And then how about those heavy metals and trace elements? Most of them were safe, but one very, very high in the basalt soils, very low in the marine, and very low in the basalt. And California has a real problem with high arsenic in the wines. And so our basalt wines are going to be very, very low, and that's very, very important that we have got. And so there are some differences. Now we're trying to carry it through and do the tasting. If you ever get a chance to go to Southern Oregon, oh my God, the best Tempranillo in the United States is coming out of the Umpqua Valley that is down there. I got hired by every one of the wineries in Southern Oregon to visit every one of the vineyards down there, and said, Scott, put the story together like you did for the Willamette Valley. And so it was fun. But the frustrating thing is I could not drink wine until the last winery or the vineyard of the day. Then I could taste all the differences. But it was really a fun story. And then the Columbia Valley, oh my God, our gorge. And then when you get into eastern Washington, it is just phenomenal. And Walla Walla, I think a lot of the best heavy red wines in the United States are coming from southeast Washington. Now, what's the difference between eastern Washington and the Willamette Valley? There's a big difference. And in Washington, 95% of all of the vineyards in southeast, from Yakima all the way out to Walla Walla, are on the Missoula flood sediments. And you're saying, wait a second, didn't you just tell us that the Missoula flood sediments are bad? Yes, but how did they control the vigor? That's the key thing. It's hot over there, and everything is irrigated. So you give it just enough water to keep the plants alive. So vigor is controlled by water. But in the Willamette Valley, where we don't irrigate, that's where 90% of the vineyards are on the upland areas and are the red ones, and only 10% are on the Missoula flood sediments. But the interesting thing is most of the wines that are made in all of those wineries, the grapes are coming from southeast Washington. The Cabs, Merlots, and Syrahs. And the Cabs, Merlots, and Syrahs from southeast Washington are superb. And so they are making some really, really good ones. But they also have their vineyards here. They're producing the Pinots and the German styles and the Chardonnays and the Pinot Gris that are over here. And so that's good. And then another interesting thing is so most of the soils are the G silt loam, the Odeney, the Hillsborough silt loam, which are all primarily on the Missoula floods. But then English Estate is on the fourth plane pendant bar. Mill Plain pendant bar. And this is formed in back of Prune Hill. And as the Missoula floods would come into town, the velocity decreased in back of it and dropped out all of the gravels and cobbles. And that's where all of our all of our gravel pits are, up there on Mill Plain, especially at the eastern end. And so the soils there are all gravels and cobbles, which is wonderful for producing great grapes. And then Olaqua Cellars up there has an Ultic Haplo-Xeralf. I look at that because the Ultic and the Haplo-Xeralf mean the old soil, and it's a red soil. And so it's a cousin of the Jory soil that we've got. And the Rusty Grape has a Hessen clay loam, and that's a Xeric Paleohumal, which the Jory is. And so again, producing very, very similar types there. So I encourage you to head out and try some of the local ones, because there are some really good little wineries here in town. So if you fell asleep at the beginning, what did I talk about? I started off talking about terroir. Now there are 6 factors. Those first 6, those produce the taste of the place. You can use it not only in the wines, but you can use it in so many other things that you have got. The Willamette Valley, which we're in here, we control the vigor by the old soils, whereas Southern Oregon, Eastern Washington, you control it by the irrigation that you have got. Willamette Valley is primarily cool climate grapes, whereas when you get to Southern Oregon or Eastern Washington, you are into intermediate warm and warm grapes that you have got. And then it's my aim in life that every time you go into a tasting room, you ask the winemaker and the people there 3 important questions. In the cool climate areas, what's the year? Because 2004, 2008, 2012, 2014, 15, 16, 17 were all warm years, great years. But 1997, 2007, and 2011 were cool climate years. Really, really, really difficult years. 1997, the wines were pathetic. It was just not a good year. It was way too bad, and so not good. Then 2007 came around. It was an El Nino year. 97 was a El Nino year, and so was 2007. And 2007 came around. I said, oh my God, here we go. This is not good. But the winemakers had grown up. The winemakers knew what to do. And I tasted some of the wines that came out in 2007, 2 years later. I said, not bad. Not great, but not bad. And then 2011, the same thing. Not great, but not bad. So the winemakers have grown up and matured, and they know how to do it. But what we found is if you cellar those 5 to 8 years, they are just incredible, elegant Pinots. And now we know in the future when we have a cool climate year, the winemakers will do a great job of making the wine. It will not be a great wine right then, but you cellar it, and then you drink it 5 to 8 years later. Something we've learned, and it's kind of fun. So ask the year, what are the clones? And so the traditional ones are Wädenswil and Pommard. And then a lot of them are into the Dijon clones. Why did you use them? Why do you not? And then thirdly, ask what's your soil? And so most of the Willamette Valley, the Jory, the red soils are the major one. Willackenzie has now been subdivided, but it's marine sediments, and then the Laurelwood of the Pisolites that you have got. And so now what I do is I christen all of you terroirists. Go forth, hit all of those wineries, and taste all of the differences in the terroir, because we live in the greatest place in the world to taste differences in terroir. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. We have time for a couple questions.
What changes do you see with the potential of climate change
I love that.
and the varieties of wine in Oregon and Washington?
And so with climate change, and the climate is warming, all you got to do is look at all the glaciers in the world, and 85% of them are shrinking. What is that going to do? Remember I showed you the 4 different zones: cool climate, intermediate warm, warm, and hot. And what will happen is your region will go into the next one. And so the Willamette Valley will slowly creep into the intermediate warm will go into warm, and then warm will get into the hot. And all you do is just change your grapes. All of the winemakers in the Willamette Valley have already noticed that. And so what you do is you start planting the first 2 grapes in the intermediate warm, which are Syrah and Tempranillo. And a cool climate Syrah. There are 2 types of Syrahs. And so you go up and down the Willamette Valley, and every winemaker at the lowest elevations has got a whole bunch of Syrah or Tempranillo that they're growing there, and they are maturing. And so because they're hedging that the climate will continue to warm up, and then they're also planting at the very, very top. And so what will happen is our area will switch into the other. England now has 25 wineries. And Sweden and Norway have 12 and 14 each. And why? Because it's warming up. In Germany, which was all white wines, now they're producing Pinot Noir. And so all around the world, we're switching. Greg Jones, though, tells us the Napa Valley's in for deep trouble because they're already at the warm versus hot area. And so they'll still be able to grow lots and lots of Zinfandel, but some of the cooler types are not going to be able to be grown there in that area.
Sorry, 2 questions, but
that's okay.
One is a real one, and one is kind of just for me. The real one is, earlier in your slides you talk about terroir and how it can be applied to other types of crops. And that's great. Like, I've never heard of that before, and it makes a lot of sense. But why is it that we don't think or talk about other crops in a terroir perspective, only wines? Like, we don't talk about, this region. We do talk about Florida grapes, for instance, but I think it's more of a marketing thing than it is really from a discerning taste perspective. So just curious what your thoughts are on different crops and terroir and why we don't think about them as a marketing and consumer perspective. And then the second question is more around, I fell in love with wine in Italy, and I'm wondering where your personal favorites are in North America for like Italian varietals that mimic real Italian wine.
Two great questions. First of all, the wine people came up with the term terroir. The French have been using it for years and years, but it is a great tool to explain taste of place. And the Portland, Vancouver area is becoming a foodie area. We are into food, drinks, and everything. And people love differences. And it's a great way of explaining differences in flavors. When I lived in New Zealand, my God, the beef it tasted completely different because it was all grass-fed from tall tussock grasslands that we had there. And that's terroir. So we're now finding it as a great way to describe all different foods. And you are seeing it. I'm seeing it over and over and over in all the food magazines being used to talk about taste of the place. And I see it being used more and more and more. Italy is one of the great wine areas of the world, to answer your second one. And a lot of times we think of Italy, lasagna, spaghetti, and things like that. There are 40 different regions in Italy with different food in each one and different wines in each one. And it is so different. For Italian whites, Orvieto whites. I absolutely love Orvieto whites. And I love Nebbiolo. And so those are my two favorite. Chianti is the Sangiovese is the major one that is there. It's good, but I like the Nebbiolo and some of the other northern ones. And then Pinot Grigio, which is up in the Dolomites. And so we produce a lot of Pinot Gris here in the Willamette Valley. Pinot Gris is done in the style of Alsace, northern France. It is higher acidity and lower alcohol. Lower alcohol, whereas Pinot Grigio is lower acidity, higher alcohol. And so you look at all the Pinot Grigio coming out of California. It's way too hot to grow a good Pinot Gris down there, so they never put Pinot Gris on it. They put Pinot Grigio on it, and it's just because it's got way too much alcohol and not in the city. It's not a well-balanced wine, whereas Oregon Washington Pinot Gris are really, really good. So if you like Italy, oh my God, go and just start at the northern part up in the Dolomites and just work your way all the way down to Sicily, which you have all these different cuisines along the way and all the different wines, and it is so much fun. And I used to take my students in Switzerland when they taught there on field trips down throughout the country and ending up in Sicily on the volcano, and it was fun. So thank you very much for coming out tonight. I will be up here in front if anybody else has any questions, and remember the March of Science on Saturday.
Thanks for listening. If you're around Portland and want to come to an event, check out our website for a list of upcoming topics at scienceontap.org, and that last part stands for Oregon and Washington. There's more about our events on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at scienceontap.org, and I'll put links in the episode notes. As usual, I want to say thanks to my friends and volunteers, including Scott Fry, Chris Gowan, Sam Lauk, Rita Nygren, Steve Perry, and Chris Trone. These events and podcasts wouldn't happen without them. A special thanks to Allie Coffin from WSU Vancouver for hosting this event, and to Graham Tully for audio production. Also, a big thank you to Jonathan Coulton for letting us use his song Mandelbrot Set as our intro and outro music.